Hassan Al-Banna's 50-Point Manifesto by Paul Sutliff with Civilization Jihad Awareness. Credits due to Point de Bascule of Canada as the main source of this document. It cannot be found many other places. Please support Point de Bascule. Learning objectives for this module. Students will be able to provide an example of the Muslim Brotherhood practice of deceiving even other Muslims to further the goals of the Muslim Brotherhood. Students will be able to identify at least 5 political beliefs of Hassan Al-Banna. Students will be able to identify totalitarian points of Hassan Al-Banna's manifesto. Students will be able to evaluate and apply Hassan Al-Banna's manifesto in terms of the Muslim Brotherhood's unstated political intentions internationally. This module begins with a rare look at deception in action on the part of Hassan al-Banna before Fawd Sag ad-Din, the Egyptian Minister of the Interior. What's rare about this is it truly shows a Muslim deceiving a Muslim for the purpose of furthering his group, the Muslim Brotherhood. So he gets called, Hassan al-Banna gets called before Fawd because there are questions if his group, the Muslim Brotherhood, is politically active. And this would not be acceptable in Egypt at this time. Fawd says, "Are you a religious group or a political party, Sheikh Hassan? It is all right to be a political party if you do not work under the cover of religion. Because if you adopt the slogan, Alhamdulillah wa Allahu Akbar, God be praised and God is great, and work in politics, this will not be acceptable because it abolishes the equal opportunity concept between you and the other parties." Hassan replied, "We are only men of faith. We do not think of politics." As stated, deception in action. The truth is now revealed. And what do I mean by that? Hassan al-Banna wrote a 50-point manifesto in 1936. This 50-point manifesto he sent to the king, King Farouk, and other leaders in the Islamic world. So when he got called before the Ministry of the Interior, he did not tell them he had written this manifesto and sent it out, or admit to it that he had done this before, a ways back. Now, this is where things become important, because when Hassan wrote this 50-point manifesto in 1936 to King Farouk and other leaders in the Islamic world, the document placed the Muslim Brotherhood firmly in the realm of political activism towards imposing traditional Islamic views on everyone. Now let's add in a dash of fascism and Islamic supremacism. Let's get that down. One of his first points: an end to a party rivalry and a channeling of the political forces of the nation into a common front and a single phalanx. Notice the concept, an end to party rivalry. So what is he saying? He wants a one-party government. No conflicts here. This is what we call fascism or communism. There would be no other point of view allowed. And the reference to flanks shows that Hassan al-Banna was very worldly in that he was keeping up with news around him. Fascism was growing in the time period he started the Muslim Brotherhood. The reference to flanks shows that he had interest not only in Hitler, but he had interests in fascist organizations in Italy and other places. Pay attention to this. You'll see more later on it. Point number 2. A reform of the law so that it will conform to Islamic legislation in every branch. Notice the slight twist here. He's truthfully saying a reform in the law so that it will be in tune with Sharia. So anything not in tune with Sharia shall be tossed out under Hassan al-Banna's belief structure. In Hassan al-Banna's 50-point manifesto, these first 2 points on the last slide come from a section entitled Political, Judicial, and Administrative Sectors. This continues. Point 3. A strengthening of the armed forces and an increase in the number of youth groups. The inspiration of the latter with zeal on the basis of Islamic jihad. Oh, is there any wonder now that this group likes violence? Let's get that down. The zeal. What is he referring to? Again, remember he's friends with Hitler, and he's talking about the Muhammad youth. So let's grow the Muhammad youth. You're going to use our Muslim Brotherhood boys, and they're going to become men, and they're going to get into your military. Going on to point 4. A strengthening of the bonds between all Islamic countries, especially the Arab countries, to pave the way for practical and serious consideration of the matter of the departed caliphate. So the caliphate left in 1924. He's concerned about this. He's thinking we need to do what we can to re-establish it. He did not say that for many reasons. Why? Because if he said it, he would have been dabbling in, and it's the exact blending of politics and religion that the Egyptian government and others would have feared. So he's dabbling. He's giving you a taste of what he wants to do. Now let's think about where we have seen this become a big concern. In the Al-Qaeda 10-year plan, that last thing that they wanted to do was establish the caliphate. ISIS established the caliphate at the end of Al-Qaeda's 10-year plan. It's important to keep that in mind. Al-Qaeda, run by members of the Muslim Brotherhood. ISIS, run by members of the Muslim Brotherhood. Let's keep going. Point number 5. The diffusion of the Islamic spirit throughout all departments of the government so that all of its employees will feel responsible for adhering to Islamic teachings. Adhering to what? Sharia. Diffusion of Islamic spirit. What are we talking about? Again, it's this push on following and adhering to Sharia. This need for the government to fully immerse the entire population into a fear or into a desire to follow Sharia. Keep that in mind. The political, judicial, and administrative sector continues. Point 8. An end to bribery and favoritism with consideration to be given only to capability and legitimate reasons for advancement. This sounds like a legitimate concern. I think it's a good one. But is it a reality in Islamic countries where the Muslim Brotherhood has actually taken over? Well, the big requirement the Muslim Brotherhood had in each of the places that it actually gained power, you had to be a member of the Ikhwan, the Brotherhood, to advance, to actually get someplace, to get a small spot. Going on, point 9, weighing all acts of the government in the scales of Islamic wisdom and doctrines. Think about that. The organization of all celebrations, receptions, official conferences, prisons, and hospitals so as not to be compatible with Islamic teaching. Again, we're talking about Sharia. The arranging of work schedules so that will not conflict with hours of prayer. So we're talking about your industry, your businesses would have to physically close in time for people to engage in prayer. So that would mean at 5 times during the day, your business must close entirely, shutter, and then prayer can happen. After the prayer, they can return to work. And this would mean a much longer workday and many other things, but this is what they're saying. Now, they have to include time off in the preparation to be able to engage in prayer. And this also is part of that discussion. Point number 10. The employment of graduates of Al-Azhar in military and administrative positions and their training. What are they trying to do? They're trying to put the Muslim Brotherhood into positions of military power. So they started and talked about the youth groups, being put in. So that's where they start the training, and now they're moving in saying, well, these guys are in the schools, let's get them in the positions of power. Keep thinking. It's Hassan Al-Banna's 50-point manifesto continues into another section he calls social and educational sectors. Point 1 under this is conditioning the people to respect public morality and the issuance of directives fortified by the aegis of the law on this subject. Again, that's a reference to Sharia. The imposition of severe penalties for moral offenses. Could this be striking off a hand for someone who steals? Could it be the stoning of those that engage in adultery? It's exactly what it is. Again, this is kind of doublespeak because they're trying to say, yes, we want this, but they're not coming out and he's not coming out and saying it. Hassan al-Banna is being he's an educator. He's proving that he understands what he can say and be politically correct. That's the example he's providing. And the Muslim Brotherhood groups such as CARE Today thrive on this knowledge. Point 2. Treatment of the problem of women in a way which combines the progressive and the protective in accordance with Islamic teachings, so that this problem, one of the most important social problems, will not be abandoned to the biased pens and deviant notions of those who err in the directions of deficiency or excess. Well, what is this talking about? Well, women, according to this, are the most important social problem in Islam. What, women are a problem? And what he's coming to is he's talking about the fact that Islam teaches something very interesting. That Muhammad believed that there were more women in hell than men. He's talking about that women were creatures not to be trusted, and there's more problems with this lack of trust. They don't consider women intelligent enough as well. So think about all these things, and they add to that a few more in this one little point. He's talking about get this part again. Deviant notions of those who err in the directions of deficiency or excess. Who's he blaming here? He's talking about Western values, where women don't dress in the way he would like them to dress. And he's referring directly to those women who would wear Western style clothing, and you're not to trust Western type persons who would disagree with Hassan Al-Banna. So he is not for women's equality. Point number 6. You'll see I'm going to be skipping through some of these, and I'll explain a little bit later. Point number 6. A campaign against ostentation in dress. Now here we get into this. And loose behavior. The instruction of women in what is proper, with particular strictness as regards female instructors, pupils, physicians, and students, and all those in similar categories. Again, the problem is women. We must make sure they dress properly. They're not intelligent enough to know how to do it on their own. This is a very, very concerning thing. And again, we're talking about a strict dress code. And again, it talked about behavior, loose behavior. You're going to hear something coming up regarding what they consider loose behavior, what Hassan Al-Banna considered loose behavior, which may shock you. Point number 7. A review of the curricula offered to girls and the necessity of making them distinct from the boys' curricula in many of the stages of education. Again, keep in mind there is a belief in Islam taught by Muhammad that women are not as intelligent as men. So we have to simplify, make less of what we teach them. So we can't challenge them. We can't force them to reach any higher. Their goals must be lower. That's what he is saying here. They can't become doctors. They can't become lawyers. Why should we bother to try? Why should we teach them the same things we teach boys? Because they just can't cut it. Again, not said, implied. And unless you understand Islamic doctrines and Sharia, you don't catch this. Point 8. A segregation of male and female students. Let's talk about that. Is this happening in the UK today in those hidden, I say hidden, actually illegal Islamic schools? Yes. Is it happening around the world today? Are there schools that segregate male and female students? Yes. Is this necessarily a bad thing of segregating male and female students? And the answer actually is no. Because in many cases, male and females do better when there are sex-segregated schools. I'm not saying it's 100% the best thing, but it can work. But listen to that next part. Private meetings between men and women, unless permitted by degrees of relationship, to be counted as a crime for which both will be censored. Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay. Now you've segregated the men from the boys from the girls. Male and female students. We're talking about boys, children, maybe teenagers. And should they dare meet with someone they are not related to, that is not of the same sex, they must be punished. Where does this come from? Again, this is Sharia. They want to punish a boy from saying hello to a girl they're not related to. It's hard to accept. Again, this segregation that they're referring to is not the same as you might think about it here. We're just talking about a separate curriculum. They're talking about a separate room for girls because they must learn less and they can't be expected to attain the same things boys can. Let's not forget that also. Point 12. The expurgation of songs and a rigorous selection and censorship of them. So now we're talking about music. It must be censored. This is what we would refer to as fascist, communist. I mean, you must listen to anything that can be put out and monitor it. Does it agree with Sharia? Does it agree with Islam? If not, it must be hidden. It must never be heard again. Now I'm going to get into what I consider Hassan al-Banna's expressed totalitarian desire. Why is this important? Well, social studies teachers in Western society teach that totalitarian rule essentially is a place that a leader has what is called total control. Those are the two words we teach as key to understanding the concept of totalitarian. Now let's look at this proposal of al-Banna's. We just talked about the censorship of music. We talked about controlling what children learn. So those are two controlling pieces. Let's continue. Point 11. The surveillance of theaters and cinemas and a rigorous selection of plays and films. Surveillance. Watching people. And this is before the concept of a digicam or being able to walk down the street and being seen from a distance on a surveillance camera. This is back when they're talking about a, quote, secret police. Where did he get these ideas? These are things he thought that were good, that had been implemented by fascists and totalitarian regimes. Point number 14. The confiscation of provocative stories and books that implant the seeds of skepticism in an insidious manner, and newspapers which strive to disseminate immorality and capitalize indecently on lustful desires. This sounds somewhat good and somewhat bad. Again, it's political correctness that's shaping the way he writes. Confiscation of provocative stories. Is he writing about porn, erotica, being taken out and censored? No, he's talking about anything that would take away from his narrative must be censored. It must be stopped. Remember, he involves the newspapers. So if you are expressing anything that would go against his view of Islam, you must be censored and kept from the public. How this is done is not stated. But again, it's a must thing, the confiscation. So if you wrote something, it was considered harmful to Muslims, you would then have to have your materials confiscated. I'm sure there would be a penalty. And what would that be? Well, they could call you an apostate and execute you. Going on, point 15. The supervision of summer vacation areas so as to do away with the wholesale confusion and license that nullify the basic aims of vacationing. So leisure time is not a good thing under Hassan al-Banna. Why? Because it becomes difficult to control you. Does that make sense, people? This is the totalitarian reach of this man's belief. Again, it's his manifesto. Point 16. The regulation of business hours for cafes. Surveillance, hear that term again, it appears over and over again in this manifesto. surveillance of the activities of their regular clients, instructing these as to what is in their best interest. So take them out, re-educate. Oh, wait a minute. We've heard that. We've seen that. Where have we seen it? Communist countries, fascist countries, re-education camps. Does that remind you of communist Russia? The Soviet Union? Don't ignore history. Point 18. A campaign against harmful customs, whether economic, moral, or anything else. Turning the masses away from these and orienting them in the direction of ways beneficial to them, or educating them in a way consonant with their best interests. These involve such customs as those to do with weddings, funerals, births, the czar, ceremonial of exorcism, civil and religious holidays, etc. Let the government set a good example in this respect. We're talking again about re-education. We're talking about eliminating culture, anything not acceptable to Islam must be eradicated under this belief, under this point of Hassan Al-Banna's Manifesto. It's an easy way to see totalitarian government being placed. Point 19. Due consideration for the claims of the moral censorship and punishment of all who are proven to have infringed any Islamic doctrine or attacked it, such as breaking the fast of Ramadan, willful neglect of prayers, insulting the faith, or any such act. So if you're not a good Muslim, you will be punished. If you missed going to prayers, you will be punished. You better be on your deathbed. All of these, so you're going to expect a religious police to be out there enforcing the law. Point 25. The cultivation of Islamic history and of the national history and national culture and the history of Islamic civilization. Today, this term, there's an actual term called the Islamization of knowledge. And what is that specifically? It is the viewing of anything that happened after the days of Muhammad and interpreting everything through the lens of the Quran, the Hadith, and the Siras. So basically, you have to have an Islamic lens in order to see anything else. Whatever you're seeing in history, if it doesn't line up with that view, it must be changed. And then you can read about it. So now you're getting a correct view. So you won't hear about Freud. You won't hear about most things that have to do with psychology or sociology. It will be bashed and pulverized into little bitty pieces of smithereens, so you can't get that knowledge because it's not Islamic. History has to be changed because wherever Islam has lost a battle, it must be changed to show that Islam has conquered instead. Or they chose to take a back seat and gain power and come back and take over. That's what we're talking about. The Islamization of knowledge. And interestingly, it is a Muslim Brotherhood entity that uses Islamization of knowledge and began to implement it here in the United States. It's now being used across the world in an entity and being promoted by a Muslim Brotherhood entity known as the International Institute of Islamic Thought. Going on to point 26. Consideration of ways to arrive gradually at a uniform mode of dress for the nation. So, totalitarian regime wants to make you dress in a specific manner. That's insane. The manifesto continues with a section on economics. Again, you continue to see the totalitarian desire of Hassan Al-Banna. Number 7, the encouragement of agricultural and industrial counseling. Attention to be paid to raising the production level of the peasant and industrial worker. Peasant, industrial worker. Does this sound like he has been paying attention to Marxism? We're getting there. He has some clue of it, maybe. It's interesting. Let's talk about what history tells us in regards to this. Well, there was a man named Stalin who offered something called a 5-year plan, and he boosted his country for a short while, and what he was really boosting was the economic power. Their food supply, he put people into something similar to what we call communes, and they worked on a collective farm where the people didn't own their property. And what happened is, because they didn't own their property and they were just working for the government, food production went down. This happened in China also, another 5-year plan. They called it the Great Leap Forward. Again, we're talking about where they tried collectivization on farms. Food production goes down. The only thing that increased factory-wise, industrial-wise, was the military. Think about it. Point 8. A concern for the technical and social problems of the worker, raising a standard of living in numerous respects. Oh, are you catching what I've been saying? Technical, social problems. We're talking about a person who is looking at, we're going to raise your standard of living, but you're going to have to conform to everything we say and tell you to do. This totalitarian cell. This is one of those totalitarian cells. Number 9. The exploitation of natural resources, such as uncultivated land, neglected mines, etc. So if there is an untapped resource, go get it now. It must be used. This is not any different from anything communist nations teach. It's very much the imperialist type mindset, and that was what Egypt was experiencing. Going on. Point 10. Priority over luxury items to be given to necessary projects in terms of organization and execution. Let's think about this. So we're going to prioritize who we give things that are considered luxuries to, as long as they're working on the right project. So we're going to determine what you can have. Oh, is that not a controlling aspect of even your economic welfare? Absolute, total control. Students who listened and run through the entire module should now be able to provide an example of the Muslim Brotherhood practice of deceiving even other Muslims to further their goals. Students should now be able to identify at least 5 political beliefs of Hassan Al-Banna. Students should now be able to identify totalitarian points of Hassan Al-Banna's Manifesto. Lastly, students should now be able to evaluate and apply Hassan Al-Banna's Manifesto in terms of the Muslim Brotherhood's unstated political intentions internationally.